Welcome to Little Sprout, a podcast for moms by moms.
We're your hosts, Sarah and Mel, here to talk all things motherhood
and keeping it real.
Okay.
Okay,
Let's start. We're going to start. Okay, so welcome to Little Sprout Mom, a podcast for moms by moms by Sarah. We are so excited to have joining us today. Her name is Jen Agha-Khan. Is that how you say your name, Jen? Okay, Jen Agha-Khan. She's a registered dietitian with her own private practice in LA called Little Eaters Academy, and just a resource for our community. And I don't know, Jen, if you want to take some time to introduce yourself as a mom and dietitian.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. I love connecting with other moms, who are local, who are going through similar things, who are in the LA area, who are also health professionals. So it's a real treat for me. And yeah, as you guys mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian. I've worked with families and kids and children all throughout my career in a lot of different aspects and spaces. But Little Eaters Academy came organically when my daughter was starting solids a couple of years ago. And I felt like there's a real need for just more actual professional hands-on support and attention during this really sometimes vulnerable and anxiety provoking time of the journey that you are on when you become a parent and a mom. And there wasn't a ton of things out there and people I was talking to, in mom groups I was in and other just areas of my life. They were just all really nervous about starting solids and feeding their kids. And people knew I was a dietitian, so they would always kind of talk to me on the side and call me and text me. And there really was this need I felt for more of a real life person, not just an app or, a PDF that you could download to help support people. And so that's how Little Leaders Academy kind of came to be. And now, we obviously specialize in educating parents and caregivers how to introduce solids with confidence, both privately and in small group classes, in person and virtually across the country. And of course, it doesn't really just stop at solids. We kind of have obviously progressed and we can follow you throughout the life cycle, supporting toddlerhood nutrition, PK eating, selective eating, family nutrition, all of that kind of stuff. And it's really about putting a face behind, this kind of specialty and dealing with a real person, me, who obviously gets what you're going through because I've been there too. And then, someone who obviously has a little bit of actual knowledge and expertise. There's a lot on social media that can feel very overwhelming as to what you should do. And it's hard to distinguish between influencer and actual, licensed professional. And so that's sort of what Little Ears Academy can offer and sets itself apart of. And especially if you're in the LA area, sometimes it's kind of nice to meet someone actually in person in your home. We come to you. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about us and me.
That's amazing. I mean, I wish I had someone you read maybe a quick little, for me at least, on social media, like you said, a quick little post and you're like, okay, I guess I'll start with purees possibly. And then you're like, but then where do I go from there?
Yeah. And I'm super excited to connect with you because I have so much knowledge from an oral motor sensory standpoint as a feeding therapist. And what I needed help with starting solids was that nutritional component.
Totally.
And I still feel lost, to be
Yeah.
honest. So excited to connect with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole food nutrition aspect. Is it important, because it's actually benefiting their growth, succeed in literally life, right? That's what good nutrition fuels.
Yes, exactly.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of where you're from and you as a mom?
Yeah, totally. So I'm originally from the East Coast and grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland. And spent most of my early, post-grad days and early parts of my career as a dietitian in New York City with my husband, and we didn't come out to LA actually until about 3.5 years ago, which was a move for his work, but ended up, being something that is definitely more long-term now. And we love our life here. And we had our daughter shortly after. And yeah, I mean, it's been such a change to our lifestyle, but a good one, and one that we definitely prefer now, especially raising children in a warm, beautiful climate, I think is huge. Yeah, exactly. Help happier, healthier thing it. But yeah, and let's see what else about me as a mom. Yeah, I have one daughter. She's 2 and change, and her name is Eloise, and she is a hoot. And if you follow me on social media, you'll see her in almost all of my content because, much to no surprise, hopefully, she loves to eat, and I'm grateful for that. But it didn't come without, obviously, a lot of work and effort on my part and everyone in my home's part. My husband, our nanny, everything. Everyone had to be on the same page with me kind of leading the ship. And yeah, aside of doing everything else, I also love being just like physically active. I've been a fitness instructor for almost 10 years, and I teach bar. So I just
So
love
awesome.
all
That's
of the health and wellness stuff.
So 3 East Coast moms connecting in LA. How special.
I feel like somehow East Coasters always end up
here.
meeting each
Find
other.
each other. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I guess today will be kind of like an interview format for our listeners. We just have some questions for Jen and her expertise in nutrition. And Sarah and I tried to separate the questions out by age group. So like more of a 6 to 12 month age and then 12 to 24 months, because just, from an oral motor perspective, what they can do is different at those time periods. We're so excited to get started. So, Jen, can you talk to us about the top nutrients for 6 to 12 months? Like, what should we be focusing on when we're first starting that transition to solids? I mean, we actually started like closer to 4 to 5 months, but can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, by and large, when you start solids, breast milk and or formula are still going to be a main part of baby's diet, and really still you're going to rely on it as though nothing has changed, at least to begin. But naturally, we know that by around 6 months, specifically, baby's iron stores do start to deplete on the ones that they were born with and that are kind of like getting them to this point. Breast milk is not a good source of iron. Formula can be, but specifically in general, when we start solids, iron is definitely a nutrient that we want to think about. It comes in all shapes and forms. You think your traditional sources of iron are going to be meat and dark meat, poultry, and that kind of stuff. But there are tons of non-plant-based sources as well. Everything from beans, lentils, tofu, flaxseed, chia seeds, nuts and seeds. And so obviously you're not going to feed all of these foods in huge portions and form right away, right? But when we're talking about like actual nutrients to just, start to prioritize, iron is definitely probably the most important in addition to fat, right? Baby's brain is developing, so they need a lot of full fat foods from the get-go, right? Foods that are rich in those omega-3s, DHA. That's your avocado. That's your olive oil, fatty fish like salmon, right? And all of this, comes with preparing very age-appropriate foods, right? I'm a big fan of that kind of like chicken bone or rib right away because that's a great source of iron. Or, salmon, or putting, chia seeds in oatmeal to start, right? All of these really nutrient dense foods. And so I would say from 6 to 12, those would be my two, like, definitely we should prioritize these foods at our meals. Now, we don't have to count grams and portion out sizes, right? In general, baby's still meeting their needs through breast milk and formula. But if you are curious, which nutrients in certain foods, say those two would definitely be mind. And then when we reach about year 1, 12 months, formula kind of starts to wean a little bit and food becomes the sole source of our nutrition. I want to continue prioritizing iron, zinc, fatty foods, but also we want to really start thinking also about things like fiber, right? That's when we start to see more selective and picky eating, which I can talk more about, really start to develop after year 1. And that's when we see increases in things like snacking and maybe snacking on a lot of, refined carbohydrate type snacks, puffs, and other things like that. And that can lead to, of course, a lot of constipation. Fiber is definitely something, comes in all shapes and forms, fruits, vegetables, oats, whole grains, seeds, that I would definitely think about, how is this showing up for my kid every day once they hit age 1?
Idea about the iron thing? Like, no, never mentioned that. Like,
Yeah.
all-
Isn't there, Jen, this would be a good question for you. I feel like I remember, and this feels like years ago at this point, but I breastfed up until 6 months, and you put drops in, right? You put
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
iron
Give people
supplementation.
the-
Yeah. In addition to like vitamin D as well, if you're breastfeeding. But yeah, so like if your baby is formula fed, yes, there is iron, there is vitamin D, absolutely. But in general, they're natural source, the one that we supply them with all throughout pregnancy that help to really like build up. Those naturally deplete around 6 months. And then on top of that, breast milk isn't a great source of iron. So that's why we want to start thinking about incorporating those foods when we start solids.
So, like, I know also for me, I was like at the very beginning obsessed with like making my own baby food,
Same.
purees, and all this stuff. But then once, I started working, it got much more difficult. And I
Cool.
kind of did like a mix of purees and baby led weaning idea. But, we're working moms. And what are your thoughts on pouches?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, probably unpopular opinion, but pouches are definitely not my favorite when it comes to relying on them day to day as a meal, as a snack in the home. I think that they serve a purpose and a time, like when we travel or if we're at a birthday party or something like that. But I personally don't recommend to my clients, getting that pouch subscription and stocking up the fridge and then just sort of like relying on those. A couple of reasons why. From an oral motor perspective, they're not teaching babies at all how to learn to chew. They're just kind of reinforcing that suck swallow mechanism that babies already learned and sort of, from bottle feeding, breastfeeding, that kind of stuff. So they're not actually using any muscles in their mouth that are needed for chewing, manipulating, the jaw, the tongue, that kind of stuff. Especially for older babies, they're kind of gone in a few slurps once they get the hang of it. So we're not really like processing the fact that like we're eating, right? It takes the brain some time to connect with the gut and sort of like, especially when they're a little bit older, pouch can be downed in a second and then they're like, what's next? And also, the reality is, yes, there are great high quality pouches out there that have salmon and beef and all of these kinds of things. I am definitely more of a proponent of eating the real food, right? And that kind of goes back to what modality of feeding are you going to start with when you are starting solids? There's this idea, which I think pouches kind of reinforce that like we have to start with purees, but we know through science and through sort of modern day feeding that that's not true, right? Babies can eat food and chew foods and learn to chew without teeth, right? They don't need purees necessarily. That being said, there's nothing wrong with starting with that, but especially with the pouch kind of game, I definitely like to listen. I have definitely given my daughter pouches, but there is a time and a place, and she kind of knows that they're for special occasions, right? I'd much rather grab a couple ingredients from my fridge, especially when you're starting out. Solids is often like people think they have to, like you said, make all these like crazy purees with all these different recipes and homemade and whatever. But you can very easily start solids. And if you want to go the pureed route, You can mash avocado on their tray. You can grab some banana. You can grab some, whole wheat bread and toast it lightly and cut it into strips. Like, it doesn't have to be this like very
Whole
involved
yeah.
thing, which I think social media makes us think that you have to like stock your freezer with all these homemade purees and
It's crazy, right? Because like I'm in space and I bought the puree maker and I did similar to Sarah, I did a combination approach, but literally what was easiest for me was like using what was on my counter and giving it.
exactly.
I
That's
used
my number one tip when I
the
educate
banana.
clients
Just use
is
what's in
use
your
what's in your
house.
fridge. Yeah.
Use what you typically eat and then and also, like some of taste is genetic, right? And they've been exposed to it in utero through breast milk, right? They're getting some kind of taste. Um they're probably going to be familiar with it and it might not be that, strong reaction. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, you see those videos or even with your own kids, the first time you give them a piece of banana and they have this face. Can you talk about
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't know, but it can take up to 20 times of exposing the same food for a baby or toddler or child to actually accept that food. So I always kind of laugh and say, I have stories of clients who say, "Oh, my baby doesn't like peas." And I said, "Okay, well, how have you served peas?" And they said, "Oh, we gave peas the first time he's tried salads, one time he spit them out and we never tried again." That doesn't mean your baby doesn't like peas, right? He needs more practice and exposure to peas, right? So that's a very normal thing that happens, right? They spit it out. This is unfamiliar. And the best thing we can do as parents is be patient and continue to serve that food in different ways, shapes, and forms. It doesn't have to be in the same form all the time, right? But we have to do our children the service of continually exposing them to a variety of tastes and flavors and foods for them to learn and practice with them. That doesn't mean they have to like every single food, but we do have to give them the chance to accept it.
I mean, I see that and educate that too for but yeah, so you have to try again, right? Like this is a new experience on so many levels for their mouth, for their tongue, for their swallowing. And then from like what you said, it's like the more consistent and patience is a virtue, but it's so important. You just have to help them work through it, right?
Same like philosophy is really important when you enter toddlerhood and picky eating. This idea of like, okay, she has not touched a vegetable in like weeks. Well, if we start to take if we start to take the vegetable off and be like, oh, she's not even gonna touch it, why am I gonna put on the plate? Well, then of course she's not gonna be exposed, have familiarity with that type of food. And so why would she ever want to try it later down the road, right? If she knows in a low pressure environment that it's kind of always going to be there in some shape, way, or form, she doesn't have to touch it, but she can expect that it's going to be there. And hey, one day she actually might try and go for it. Or hey, she sees mom or dad eating it. I'm going to try it now too, right? And so that same idea of like being patient, just continuously offering the foods in a low pressure environment is really important, like all throughout the life cycle.
So I guess like going along that, like my daughter right now, I serve her something and she wants nothing on the plate. All done after sitting there for 2 minutes, but I know she
Yeah.
has dinner. So what do you
Yeah.
do? Do you offer something else or do you just say,
Yeah.
sorry? Like, I
Yeah,
don't
and
know. I
like
can't.
on that,
Yeah.
on that, Jen, like my pediatrician says this, and as someone in this space, like we pediatricians are great for what they know, but they don't know a lot, right?
Yeah.
Because my pediatrician's like, if they're hungry, they'll eat, you know,
Mhm.
And so, can you
Yeah.
speak a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's a balance between the two. I think that if you're in that selective eating phase, it's a good idea to put something on the plate that you know that they are open to, right? Some people will call this a safe food. I think it's just a food that, we know that they're comfortable with. And then I would continue serving whatever else is planned for that meal, whether those are new foods, whether those are foods that maybe they've tried, they've liked sometimes, maybe not, right? But I do think that I'm big believer that in not being a short order cook, right? If you sit down and they're like, no, all done, first definitely once they approach toddlerhood and we can communicate more, we explain that, the meal isn't over yet. We're all still eating. Like, we'll let you know when it is, kind of thing. Or, oh, we still have, 10 more minutes all together at the table. You don't have to eat what's on your plate, but we have to sit here and talk, or whatever it is. And then I think that, like I said, there's nothing wrong in honoring their preferences and serving a food that that they like. But I would really avoid getting up and going back into the kitchen 100 times and saying, okay, well, do you want this? Do you want that? Now I'll give you fruit. Now I'll give you this, right? It becomes really overwhelming for them, first of all. And then it's giving into this idea that they'll just be able to kind of say no and get other things and snacks and that kind of stuff. I do somewhat agree with your pediatrician, especially when we're in more of that toddler, we're past year 1.5, we're nearing 2, right? Kids eat, right? And they will eat when they are hungry. Of course, if there's a certain medical condition, if we're dealing with, we need to, gain a specific amount of weight, that kind of stuff, that's totally different. But if we're talking about just the normal, healthy, developing child who is going through a period of selective eating, I am a believer in, all right, like, we're going to clean up now. The meal is over. We'll, eat at our next meal, kind of thing. And we'll be okay. They've eaten throughout the day, likely. And that sort of allows them to understand that, like, these are the structured meal times and this is what is being offered. And we don't have to eat everything on the plate. And sometimes we'll eat more or less, and that's okay. But yeah, I don't encourage people to get into the habit of offering them 1,800 different things if they say no to, what's on the plate.
Good to know, because sometimes I'm like, she literally didn't take a bite. Like, I feel bad. And then I'm just like, do you want something else?
I know it's hard too. But here's also the thing. If she's still like, sometimes I feel like as a mom, like from my mom hat, I'm like, okay, I know what she ate all throughout the day. Like, she's definitely not going hungry. And also I know she's getting, she's like, my daughter still drinks milk at night. So I'm like, I know she's not going to bed hungry,
Okay. No, that makes me feel better. Thank you for that. And then going back to like when they're infants and you are making food for them or starting to make food for them.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like salmon or chicken or whatever, normal foods. Are there any things that you shouldn't be putting in the like meal, like any ingredients or spices? It should just be plain food or something else?
Yeah, totally. So I'm a big proponent of, you should be flavoring and seasoning your baby's foods from the get-go. The 6 to 12 months is their window of opportunity and acceptance of new flavors and new foods and textures and all of that. Absolutely. Seasoning, herbs, spices. Obviously, like, I wouldn't give them a full jalapeno, but it's okay to let them taste something that has a little kick to it. They might, give a face or maybe start to cry or need some water or whatever, but it's not dangerous. The ones that you really want to stay away from under age 1 is going to be anything that has honey in it because of the risk of infant botulism. Anything that's raw, right? We're not going to like cook or serve tartare or anything like that, right? Cow's milk in the form of full glasses. Obviously, if it's in a recipe or it's cooked or whatever, that's okay, but it shouldn't be replacing formula or breast milk. And then the other sort of like controversial sometimes one is salt, right? So like historically, we've been told babies should not have salt. Their kidneys aren't well developed enough to clear that sodium. But really, there's actually not a ton of good up-to-date research on what is even an appropriate amount. We know that, sodium is a vital mineral that we all need and require to survive and to function. But there's really has never even been established like an upper limit for babies of this age. And most experts in the field can kind of agree it's unrealistic to say no salt at all. Salt is in a lot of things, both natural and not. And if you take your baby out to a restaurant or if you order takeout or anything, if you give them a snack, there's going to be salt in some way, shape, or form, and that's okay. I think the general consensus between 6 and 12 is like not adding tons and tons of extra salt, right? So if you cook a lot and you're a heavy salter or you're using a lot of like bouillon cubes or other like high sodium ingredients, maybe we leave babies aside, but you don't have to like go to a restaurant and be like, what's in this? Hold the salt, right? Because you also want to think about the quantity at ages 6 to 12. how much they're actually eating, right? A lot of it's going on the floor, it's being thrown. The actual amount they're ingesting is very low. So we don't really have to, again, in the healthy developing child who doesn't have other medical conditions, we don't have to stress about the salt, right?
Because that was another thing that like I heard whispers around. So
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't give like jerky and a ton of processed meats to a 6 to 12-month-old also. So yeah.
You talk about like your recommendations. So Rena's babies are 19 months, which is crazy. Like, talk about high protein foods or your recommended snacks for like higher calories. Do we have to be worrying about that? Are we just giving them what we're eating if we in general eat healthy? Like, what are your recommendations for toddlers?
Yeah, that in general, obviously everything's like just like adults, super individualized. So like if your baby or your toddler, has had growth concerns or, your pediatrician is recommending a higher calorie protein sort of situation to help, catch up growth or anything like that, then of course these are things that you want to kind of focus on. But I think a lot of times, and not to anyone's fault, we conflate a lot of the nutrition advice we get as adults that like it applies the same to our kids, like protein. But actually, toddlers ages 1 to 3 only need 13 grams of protein per day. That's sort of like the general recommendation. So let's round up for just sake of ease and say 15. Okay, that's 5 grams of protein per meal, right? Pretty doable if we're serving a balanced plate.
Okay. Where were we?
We were talking about protein.
Yeah, we were talking about protein.
Yeah, you guys-
So-
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. So, where did we leave off? 5 grams of protein.
We're leaving off just about, sort of what I'd recommend for toddlers and sort of if, prioritizing high protein, high calorie. And I think it really just depends on your child's needs and the type of eater they are, if they're super active, if they have medical conditions, that kind of stuff. I have this conversation all the time. I would say like in general, I'm a big fan of like really trying to like prioritize meals over tons of snacks, right?
Okay.
Some kids do prefer to eat smaller, more frequent meals, but I think that in general, this idea of like grazing every hour or so is like the best recipe for ruining appetite at mealtime. And mealtime is really when we want to like get all of the stuff in as much as possible. And so the best way to do that is to have your toddler arrive hungry to the table.
Yeah.
So snacks should be purposeful and they should have kind of a balance of some fat and fiber and that kind of stuff. And again, the pouch is fine, but like it's not going to really like fill them if they're in fact truly hungry. And then they just kind of keep munching and grazing all afternoon. They sit down to dinner and they're like, no, thank you. So I definitely kind of am kind of on the more side of like, let's give you bigger meals and then reserve the snacks on needed.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah, so then like I guess
that.
for taller age, just because talking about for ourselves, like 3 meals a day and then
Okay.
I would
no
say like
snacks?
snacks as needed, depends what time they eat breakfast. If they're eating at 7 a.m., then like definitely a snack is probably needed by 9:30, 10, depending on when they eat lunch. And again, if we have fresh food at home or if we can easily pack some on the go to the park or school or whatever, like, something simple like a fruit and some cheese or like yogurt and something else like that. These are snacks that are going to help sustain them and give them energy. They're not going to crash their blood sugar. They're not going to them looking for more, right? That's where that fat component really comes in. My daughter's at the age now where I'm comfortable with her eating things like nuts and seeds, supervised and that kind of stuff. But like, that's a great way to like fill them up without just downing a whole bag of puffs and still looking for more, right? Even something like peanut butter or, other kinds of nut butters or something. Those are great ways to like actually fill them up.
Okay.
good suggestions.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I'm gonna like go change my whole diet.
Oh my
god.
no. It's all about just like the small changes that add up over time, right?
Yeah, totally.
And it has to work for you and your lifestyle and your family,
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. No, it's true. I guess some other questions is like, so you like kind of talked about, just mentioned like nuts. Your daughter is now old enough to like snack on nuts because she's
Yeah.
not going to choke on it. But like, I guess when you're starting off with food, also moms are terrified of their babies choking. So like, you did mention like giving your baby like a chicken leg or something, and I always saw that and I was like, what the like
Babies
that
can
seems
do
crazy.
Babies can do way more than you think.
Yeah,
And
and actually, like the rib bone, the chicken drumstick, those
way
are
less of a choking
actually,
risk.
yeah, those are what we'd
Yeah.
call as like food teethers, right? They're super
Yeah.
hard and unbreakable. They're actually great for building jaw strength. And so same thing as like
Interesting.
a pineapple core, a mango pit, all of those things are actually way, way lower on the choking scale. Of course, you want to remove loose skin and bones and that kind of stuff, but those are actually way less of a choking risk than, obviously something like a round big blueberry at that age,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
like absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's like, I feel like we're licensed professionals, but a lot of it is like counseling and like coaching yourself and your clients and your moms. Yeah, like it is scary, and there's a huge emotional component to eating across the lifespan, right?
Totally.
So, and socio-emotional too, right? So, yeah, it's scary, and social media is just so filled with like the plethora of information that it's so hard to tease out. But I'm sure as we have a possible yourself. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to figure out what works for you and your family, right? Like if it's not a turkey bone, it could be a fruit pit. If it's not
Right.
any of that, that's okay.
Right.
Right? And that's kind
Exactly.
of my mantra too. But Jen's definitely right. It helps with jaw and oral motor growth and development.
And I always say, choking is the number one thing that I see like the fear, and that's what holds people back from developing to advancing to finger food, and they want to stay on purees forever. And so I always recommend like equip yourself with the confidence, take a CPR class, like
Yes.
We talked
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
yes, like that way you're not holding anyone back and you feel good about what to do in the event of an emergency. Also, a lot of
Right.
people don't realize, but actually spoon feeding your baby increases the risk of choking more than them feeding themselves.
Right.
And people are like, wait, what? And that's because that the brain is, signaling off a million different messages even before that food hits the tongue. And when they're not in the driver's seat and someone else is giving them that spoon and trying to shove it in their mouth, those messages and reflexes are not acting and firing as fast. And so this whole idea of like, let me just feed my baby all these soft, lumpy foods, obviously
Yeah.
it's helping them develop, but it also, they could still choke on that, right?
Right.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You think because you're in control of it, you're like, I'm not going to cause them to choke.
Yeah.
That's
But actually,
Exactly.
it's the opposite. Okay. I think we can probably wrap up.
Yeah.
We have
So
so
I
much.
also just like talk like kind of diving into a little bit like what you do. So like if someone wanted to like have a and do you coach them? Sorry, just going to consult them.
Yeah,
How do they
So we
find you?
offer a variety of different services, everything from, our bread and butters, our intro to solids class. It's virtual or in person. It can be with a group of friends. It could be just you and your family. And we go through really everything you need to know to be well equipped. To start solids, it's 90 minutes. You are given a ton of resources. And then everything after that is, as you wish. We do follow-up sessions, virtual in person. We have memberships where if you just want to text with me because you're like, hey, I need a sanity check. Does this look okay? Let me send you pictures. Here's what I'm making. We offer that too. So we really offer like a plethora of different services to kind of meet you where you're in the journey.
That's amazing. Yeah. And where can they find you? Like your
Yes.
social
My
media?
Instagram is Little Eaters Academy, and then my website is littleeatersacademy.co. So feel free to follow, reach out, email, anything. Yeah, we just love connecting and helping really help support moms at any stage of feeding their kids, but especially in the beginning. And so that's what we're here to do.
Thank you,
Amazing,
Jen.
our first guest. So special. Definitely check
course.
Jen out. And don't forget to like, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. We're on all the things. And we appreciate your support in building our mom community and tribe.
Thanks,
Jen.
Jen.
Thank you guys so much for
Bye.
having me.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.